Good evening. We're in John chapter 10 this evening, continuing our study of the Gospel of John. And just to kind of recap, because the first half of chapter 10 is a continuation of the discussion from chapter 9. And so in chapter 9, you remember that Jesus heals the blind man, and he is present on the scene, and then he quickly exits the scene, and the focus is on the controversy that exists because of Jesus healing him. And so you see the discussion between the crowd and the Pharisees, and then the Pharisees interrogating his parents, and then interrogating the man who was born blind. And he is expelled from Jewish relationships, especially the synagogue and other things, especially from the presence of the Pharisees. And after doing that, Jesus re-enters the scene and finds him and points him to faith in himself, that is, to faith in Jesus. And of course, he comes to a saving faith in Jesus. And so he's communicating to them, and he closes down the discussion by pointing out. And you'll see this often in many texts that deal with Jesus healing blindness. The person who is physically blind will many times be the one who can spiritually see, and those who can physically see will be the ones who are spiritually blind. And that has proven to be the case even here. And just to remind ourselves, back up to chapter 9, beginning in verse 39, and then we'll keep reading forward to the end of chapter 9. Jesus said, "For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard these things and said to him, "Are we also blind?" Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now you say we see, your guilt remains." And so that paints for us that picture we had a moment ago, that those who can see and know that they are spiritually blind or impoverished, as Jesus would say in the Sermon on the Mount, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," those are the ones that Jesus can open their eyes for them to see. But those who believe that they can see, when in actuality they are blind, Jesus can't do anything for them. And so as he moves into chapter 10, he continues, and when you look at the end of this particular section in chapter 10 and verse 21, the crowd is discussing again what Jesus has been teaching. It says, "Others said, 'These are not the words of one who is possessed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind?'" And so they're replaying that from chapter 9. And so this is a continuous flow. There's not a break in the narrative. This continues the conversation. Jesus goes on the offensive, and he goes after the religious leaders. Now, in this chapter, especially the first half, the first 21 verses in the continuation of this discussion, Jesus, of course, is going to describe himself as the good shepherd and the door into the sheepfold. Now, that has great background in Old Testament relationships between God and his people, and so forth. For an example, in Ezekiel 34, Ezekiel 37, Zechariah 13, and even in the New Testament, Hebrews 13, 1 Peter chapter 2, and then Revelation chapter 7, Jesus is pictured or foreshadowed as our shepherd. Now, this shepherd-sheep relationship, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were shepherds. Two main leaders in Israelite history had been shepherds, Moses and David. The Bible speaks on a number of occasions about Israel being the flock of God, Psalm 100, verse 3. Other times it speaks of God being the shepherd of Israel, Psalm 23 and verse 1, most particular, Isaiah 40 and verse 11. On other occasions in the New Testament, elders are seen to be shepherds or pastors of God's people, Acts chapter 20 and 1 Peter chapter 5. So this has a background in leadership. The individual's responsible, and in leadership, what we learn here about leadership is, and when we're given the image of a shepherd, many people view that as some kind of easy job. You just go out and you watch them, but it's a highly dangerous job. It is one that you have to care for and protect the sheep. And so that's pictured, even in the Old Testament, coming down to the New Testament, of God's leaders, because their job was to extend themselves to take care of that which belonged to God, his people in particular. So Jesus is going to come after them, and in the process, I should say, he's going to exalt himself as the good shepherd, and in the process go after the false shepherds of Israel, in particular these Pharisees. And so let's see what he's got to say. Chapter begins, "Truly, truly, I say to you," that double truly or double amen statements that we've talked about in the beginning. It precedes the statement to tell you that what he's about to say is extremely truthful and trustworthy. "Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber." And so to kind of give some historical backdrop here, a local sheepfold, a number of shepherds in the community would build a communal pen, so to speak. And they would mix their flocks in those pens, and they would hire someone to watch the gate at night to keep people away and to fight off robbers and thieves from entering in and climbing the walls and getting in and stealing the sheep, throwing them over the wall to someone who was waiting to catch them and steal them. And so they would hire them. And so you would have multiple flocks mixing together many times in these sheepfolds. If you're extremely wealthy, you could have your own, but most likely they were communal in their nature. And so he says, but the one who climbs in by another way, he is a thief and a robber. You see, the shepherd, the gatekeeper knows who the shepherds are. And so when the shepherd comes, he opens the door and he gets free access. He has nothing to hide. But the thief, they have to come in through the back door, so to speak, although it's not a door. They have to climb up over the walls and catch the sheep and throw them back over the walls in order to steal. Now, Jesus' illustration here is about the leaders in Israel, especially these leaders. They are thieves. They have set themselves up. The sheep do not belong to them, but they're stealing them to their own thoughts and thinking and theology. So he paints them as thieves and robbers. But, he says, verse 2, the one who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep, because he's known by the gatekeeper, he's known by the sheep, and so he enters in with nothing to hide. And Jesus is putting himself in that position. That's the way he's framing this. To him, the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. An important book to read is by Philip Keller, who was a shepherd, I believe, in Africa. But he wrote a little book, a very easy read, but a very important read. A shepherd looks at Psalm 23, or a shepherd's look at Psalm 23. And he talks about a number of things, obviously in a focus on Psalm 23, but one of the things he points out about the relationship between shepherd and sheep is the naming of each individual sheep and their ability to recognize the voice of their shepherd. If another shepherd calls them, they will not go to him, even if he's wearing the shepherd's clothing, because they know the voice of the shepherd, the distinctive nature of it. So Jesus puts it here, the sheep hear his voice, he calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. That's an important image. In the Middle East, you don't drive sheep, you lead them. And so it says, verse 4, when he has brought out all of his own, he goes before them. That is, he makes sure he gets all of them out of the pen or the flock or the sheepfold. He goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers, what we said a moment ago in that image. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So the overall image of what he's saying is the reason why people are following me is because they belong to me. I am their shepherd. I am their God who's come down to call them out, and they belong to me. So the reason why people are following me and coming to me is because I am their shepherd. You are thieves. You are exploiting the people of Israel. Instead of serving them, you're exploiting them. I'm their shepherd, and I'm here to truly serve them, and they know my voice, and they know who I am when I come in, and they can put the evidence together and come to the right conclusion about my identity, and they follow me. Now, Jesus turns the discussion a little bit further here in verse 7. So Jesus again said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, notice the introduction again of the truly, truly statement. I am the door of the sheep. So now the image changes from that of a shepherd, but to the door. Now this could have reference to the actual door on the sheep pen, or it could have reference to how the shepherd, if he stayed with his sheep overnight, would actually sleep at the door or at the gate. And so people would literally have to go through him to get into the sheepfold. Either way, the image is the same. That Jesus, it's very similar to what he's going to say in chapter 14 and verse 6. I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and no one can come to the Father except through me. So I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers. Now, he's not saying that every leader who ever preceded him was a terrible individual. You had your Moses, you had your David, you had your Josiahs. I think what he has in context is more of over the last couple of hundred years of history that would reach back into what we call the Intertestament period. That Jewish leaders it turned into more about them than it did about serving the people. And you had these false messiahs arise trying to create military movements. And those individuals did not truly care for the sheep. And the way that the religious sects of the Jewish religion had developed, they didn't legitimately care for the people. And so that's what he's saying. Those were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. The sheep would not follow them. He goes on to say and repeat again, I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved. Talking about being saved by his sin. You want to be saved from your sin, you got to come through Jesus. And he will go in and out and find pasture. In and out is the abundance of blessing. It's the leadership that the Lord provides. It's covenant blessing, Deuteronomy 28 and verse 6, Psalm 121 and verse 8. And find pasture, that is the abundant life. He makes me to lie down in green pasture, Psalm 23 and verse 2. And so Jesus is saying, I am this door. If you want salvation, you'll have to come through me. But when you come through me, it's an open door to an abundant life, which he will now explain in verse 10. The thief comes only to steal and kill and to destroy. Their motives are sinister and they're selfish. I came that they might have life and have it abundantly, that which is beyond measure. Some people see this as an allusion to Psalm 118 and verse 20. But the point Jesus is making is he's contrasting himself. In this context, the thief that comes to steal and kill and to destroy has reference to these religious leaders who were exploiting their people. But I'm coming that they may have life and have it abundantly, beyond measure. I'm coming to truly serve the people, to serve my people. And so he is, in that sense, the faithful shepherd. And he will go on to explain that then in verse 11. I am the good shepherd. This is another of our important I am statements. One already mentioned as I am the door, but this one is I am the good shepherd. And the word translated good here is carries with the idea of beauty and nobility. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Now, in seeking to rescue the sheep, David even spoke in 1 Samuel 17, 34 to 36, that he had rescued sheep from the paw of the lion and the bear. And so to pursue them, he would go and kill those animals and put his own life in danger. Now, if that's true of an earthly shepherd, how much more so of Jesus, the heavenly shepherd, who would come down not just to rescue people from the clutches, but willingly give his life that they might be rescued from the clutches. The shepherd would certainly risk his life. The good shepherd is giving his life so that his sheep may live. And so he contrasts that with verse 12. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches and scatters them. And so he has no personal connection to him. It's just a way to make money to him. He's just serving as a hired hand. He won't stay behind to fight off the wolf the way that the shepherd would. He flees, verse 13, because he's a hired hand and he cares nothing for the sheep. It's self-interest. And again, this is talking about the Pharisees and religious leaders of the day. It's self-interest. Verse 14, I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. And the idea of knowledge is the idea of a loving relationship. I know them intimately, and they know me intimately. We love one another. And he goes on to explain it, just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, I lay down my life for the sheep. And so he's giving us these shadows of the cross as he's living in the shadow of the cross at this moment, just maybe 6 months out from his own crucifixion. And he's saying, I'm going to give my life that my sheep may live. He's willing to do what true leadership is about and what shepherding is really about. He goes on to say in verse 16, and I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock and one shepherd. This is a reference to the Gentiles. The sheepfold, he's calling his people out of Israel in his ministry. And through the apostles, Matthew 28, 18 through 20, and the Great Commission, he will bring Gentiles into the fold, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. It's not going to be these distinctions between Jews and Gentiles anymore. This is Ephesians 2, 11 through 22. Acts chapters 10 and 11 with Cornelius coming in as the first Gentile convert that we know about recorded in the gospel. That responded to the gospel in Acts chapters 10 and 11. Chapter 10 are the events, and chapter 11 are dealing with some of the fallout of the events and the rehearsal of those things. And so he's saying, and this goes back, by the way, to many things the Old Testament talks about the Jews and Gentiles coming together again. And so there's one flock and one shepherd. For this reason, verse 17, the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. So I'm laying down my life, talking about his death, that I may take it up again, talking about his resurrection and his ascension and ultimate glorification. And in doing that, he's glorifying the name of the Father. Therefore, the Father loves him. He said, now he continues to drive home and emphasize this point. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. As he will say later in the garden, when Peter reaches forth his sword and cuts off the ear of Malchus, put it up. Those who live by the sword will perish by the sword. Do you not think that I could not at this moment call 12 legions of angels and deliver me from this? That's his point. I'm laying it down. It's a voluntary sacrifice. I have the authority to lay it down, and I have the authority to take it up again. This charge I have received from my Father. And so I'm willingly giving my life for the sheep. Now we see the response of the people, as has become a consistent pattern as Jesus is teaching throughout these longer discussions in the Gospel of John. There was again a division among the Jews because of these words. Many of them said he has a demon, very similar to what's been said about him in chapter 7 and verse 20, 848, 852, and that he's insane. So he's demon-possessed and he's out of his mind. Why listen to him? Now, first of all, it's just an accusation they're throwing to try and dismiss him. And you just dismiss people as crazy, and therefore you don't have to really deal with whether what they're saying is true if you just call them crazy and dismiss them. Others said, and this is their argument is very similar to that, these are not the words of one who is oppressed by a demon. He's making sense. This is not, what you're saying does not make sense. He makes sense. And if he were possessed or insane, he wouldn't make sense. And then they go on to say, can a demon open the eyes of the blind? Chapter 9, verses 30 through 33, same argument the blind man made. Chapter 7, verse 31. And so you see this division in the crowd. Some people, like their leaders, are just dismissing him as insane and demon-possessed because that's easy. It doesn't require any mental thought. But the other individuals are looking at the situation, examining the evidence, saying, yeah, but what he's saying makes sense. He's not acting like an insane person. And furthermore, you can't argue with what he's doing. Demon-possessed men don't open the eyes of blind people, which is a prerogative of God. And so this exchange that began in the first part of John chapter 9 is drawn to a conclusion, and the people are still as divided as they have been. But then we fast forward at the end of this chapter about 2 months, looking in the month of Chislev, which would be late November, early December, kind of falls between those 2 months as we know them. And it says at that time, the Feast of the Dedication took place at Jerusalem. Now, the Feast of the Dedication that's taking place here, this is not actually a Old Testament law enforced feast, not like Passover or Tabernacles or the Day of Atonement or something like that. This is one that actually, where to understand this, we have to understand intertestament history. That 400-year gap between Malachi and Matthew. There's a lot of things that take place, and one of those events had to do with what became known as the Abomination of Desolation. Antiochus IV Epiphanes, a Syrian ruler, went into Jerusalem and tried to compel Jews to cease their practices, their Jewish practices, burning copies of Scripture. He ultimately goes into the temple and desecrates it by offering a pig or a sow, an unclean animal, on the altar. And eventually that leads to a revolt. The Maccabees, Judas Maccabeus, they lead a revolt, and ultimately they end up cleansing and overthrowing Antiochus in that sense, casting them out, and they gain a degree of independence. They don't keep it for an extended period of time, but they gain it for a little bit. And that took place on the 25th of Chislev, 164 BC. And they set up this Feast of Dedication. We know it today as Hanukkah, or the Feast or the Festival of Lights, because they would light 8 candles. There's different schools of thought about when they lit those 8 candles. Some people said you lit 8 to begin with and then took one away every day. Some people said you started with 1 and worked your way up to 8. But they lit those candles to remind it as a time of light. And the entire city of Jerusalem, of course, is lit up because you got so many candles burning at the time. And so Jesus is there celebrating the Feast of Dedication, the Intertestament period. And it was winter, of course, consistent with time. The season would have been rainy. Winter is their rainy season, so it may have been raining. So it's cold and maybe wet. And Jesus is walking in the temple in the colonnade of Solomon, this porch, Solomon's porch, or portico as it's called, where you had all these pillars that upheld kind of an open air, breezy, but it could cover you from the elements, as opposed to where they might teach in some of the open courtyards on when you had good weather, when it was warmer, or at least somewhat cool, not cold, the way it would be in winter, and when it was dry. And so he's walking in this place. And by the way, later on in Acts chapter 2, this is where the early church will meet. They will have their worship services on Solomon's porch. So, verse 24. So the Jews gathered around him and said to him. Now, gathered, some people suggest, probably should better be translated surround or encircle. And so they kind of circle around him in almost a mob type sense. Obviously, the religious leaders here. And they said, how long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly, tell us publicly. Now, obviously, he's answered the question. He's given them evidence. This is more of their ridiculousness. They're just they ask him the same questions, hoping that he's going to trip up, hoping that he's going to give them a reason so that they can, in their minds, kill him. That's the way people do when they have sinister motives. They keep asking the questions. No matter how many times you answer them, and no matter how many times you answer them truthfully, they're going to keep poking and keep prodding, hoping for you to trip up. And they don't believe you. And that says more about them than it does you. Jesus answered them, I told you, and you don't believe, and you do not believe. I've given you the evidence. The works that I do in my Father's name, they bear witness about me. I've told you who I am. I've shown you who I am, is what he's saying. But you do not believe me because you are not among my sheep. Going back to the previous illustration from 2 months earlier, when he talked about this concept of sheep hearing his voice and knowing him and following him. So that's why you don't believe, because you're not truly looking. You think you see, you don't believe you're blind, you think you see, but ultimately you're blind and you're going to remain blind. You think you've heard the voice of God, but you haven't, you're not listening to my voice. And so that's why you don't listen to me. And I'm not shocked that you're rejecting me. He goes on to explain, my sheep hear my voice, I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father, who has given them to me, is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of the Father's hand. I and the Father are one. And so he's talking about the security of those who follow him, and saying, even in a bigger picture in the context, he's saying, and you're not a part of that group because you won't accept who I am. You're walking according to sinister motives and refusing to accept what I say and what I do as the evidence to prove who I am. And so you're not saved. You don't have the protection of God for your soul. Now, this text is, as you're very familiar, a number of people see this as an unconditional eternal security discussion. I do not. I think that is to take it and not really treat it the way it is seen in context. Let me explain what I mean by that. Contextually, this is connected to chapters 9 and 10, where you have the leadership of Jesus, the shepherding of Jesus, contrasted with the hireling and the evil shepherds of Israel. And when you look at the blind man, you had a man that was coming to faith in the Lord the way that he should have. And instead of caring for a man and spiritually nurturing a man, they just cast him out. And what Jesus is saying here is the person who comes to me, as he said in chapter 6, I'm not going to cast them out. It's not unconditional eternal security. It's the individual who comes to me, who hears my voice and who follows me. That is the individual who is safe in my hand. That is, there's no external force that can take you out of my hand or out of the Father's hand, because we are one. And so the idea of unconditional eternal security is one that it doesn't fit the context. Okay. Not to mention the mountains of passages that illustrate individuals who were saved and then they lost their salvation. And to some people that is contradictory, and I understand the Calvinistic underpinnings to it. I don't want to be overly reductionistic with that. But you have to take Scripture with its tension and interpret the whole of Scripture, as opposed to a notion that is believed based upon a text here or a text there, and then forcing that notion into every other text. And that's a mistake that's made by too many when it comes to this particular text. Instead of just looking at it in the overall flow and context of what is going on in the contrast of leadership and external forces and individuals who choose to follow Jesus and individuals who do not follow Jesus. It's not a discussion of the individuals who follow Jesus and their choices to live a sinful lifestyle after they choose to follow Jesus. This is a contrast between the ones who accept Jesus and the ones who don't. And that the ones who don't follow Jesus they might be able to expel people from their synagogues, and might be able to expel people from their groups, but they can't expel them from the safety and protection of God. That's what the text is saying. Okay. Now, in verse 31, the Jews pick up stones again to stone him. They've already tried in chapter 5 for making himself equal with God. Chapter 8 and verse 59, they try to stone him again after he declared himself to be the I Am. Jesus answered them, and by the way, they would be basing that right to stone him on the charge of blasphemy from Leviticus 24 and verse 16. Jesus answered them, I have shown you many good works from the Father. This good is this kalos, these beautiful and noble works, winsome in their nature. For which of them are you going to stone me? Now, Jesus is trying to get them to see their own blindness. It's obviously they're not going to. He says, okay, so for which of the good works are you going to stone me? The Jews answered him, it's not for good works that we're going to stone you, but because of blasphemy, because you being a man, make yourself God. It's your claim that you are God, that you are equal with the Father. And so again, you can't win with them. And that's something even today we have to learn. Some people, you're never going to win with them. It doesn't mean you should cease to try. But you do have to understand when somebody's mind is bent on something and made up, look, the Lord himself could not convince them. And you know what? A lot of times we're not going to convince some of these people either. But we still extend opportunities to put the truth in front of them. And if they choose to reject it, that's up to them. So Jesus is going to point out something. He's going to quote the law to them, Psalm 82 and verse 6. He quotes from the Septuagint version, translation, I should say. And he says, Jesus answered them, is it not written in your law, I said you are gods? Again, Psalm 82 and verse 6. If he called them gods to whom the word of God came and the scripture cannot be broken, do you say of him whom the Father consecrated and sent to the world, you're blaspheming because I said I am the Son of God? All right, now watch the argument he's making here. So in Psalm 82 and verse 6, it's a psalm written about unrighteous rulers. Rulers that were supposed to take care of Israel and they had neglected their responsibilities, which, by the way, fits the context exactly what's going on here with the Jewish leaders or not fulfilling their responsibilities before God to lead their people and care for them. And in this context, he says, you are gods, this Elohim. And so he refers to them in that sense because they take on, and as making judgments, they are doing things that mirror that which God does as the judge of all flesh. And so the big point he's trying to make is this. You're getting upset because I'm claiming to be God. But if you look in your law, it says that as rulers, God calls you gods, little g, Elohim. Do you say that the Father, let me back up to 35. If he called them gods to whom the word of God came, That is, if he called the leaders to whom the word of God came gods as rulers, do you say to him whom the Father consecrated and sent into the world, you are blaspheming because I said I'm from God? So he's arguing from the lesser to the greater. If he can look at rulers who were given the word of God and call them gods, how much more is that true of the one he consecrated, who is God, his Son, and sent him into the world? His argument is that their argument is wildly inconsistent. It's wildly inconsistent. They're not applying it in a way that is consistent. And so Jesus does come from God, not one who received the word of God and was called little g gods because of their reflection of the rule of God as rulers, but the one who comes from God, who is God. You can accept one but not the other. It's inconsistent. Verse 37, if I am not doing the works of my Father, then do not believe me. But if I do them, even though you do not believe me, believe the works, that you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I in the Father. And so he keeps reasoning with them. Pay attention to what I'm doing then. Okay? You don't like what I'm saying, but look what I'm doing. That should be enough to compel you. But it doesn't. Again, they sought to arrest him, but he escaped from their hands. And thus this will close down a large portion of the public ministry of Jesus in Jerusalem in particular, other than the last week events in John's narrative, the way he puts it. So as he leaves their hands, he leaves Jerusalem, verses 40 and 41. He went away across the Jordan to the place where John had been baptizing at the first, and there he remained, chapter 1 and verse 28, baptizing across the Jordan River in that area known as Perea. So it's very interesting that he goes back to that place, the place where it all began, where he himself was baptized by John. So that's where his ministry began, and as it starts to close down, he goes there again. Verse 41, and many came to him. They knew where he was, and of course the crowds always find him. And they said, John did no sign, but everything that John said about this man was true. And many believed in him there. They're putting it together. They're seeing it. So he's going back to where the ministry began, and believers are being multiplied based upon who he is. And so Jesus is laying out the evidence. He's showing who he is. He's making that case very plain. He's exposing these teachers in Israel. He's extending olive branches to them. They're not taking them. And he's exposing them for who they are. And when you do that, that can get you in trouble. And ultimately, that's what's going to happen. They're seeking to put him to death, and that's going to even amp up. When we look at chapter 11, hopefully next week, when he raises Lazarus from the dead, that's when they decide he's got to go. I mean, they've already believed that they've got to do something about him, but now they're up to the point, after chapter 11, they'll be to the point, he's got to go. And it's just so sad that people are looking their God in the face and they can't even see him. But, we have to be careful lest we get some generational arrogance here, that we look our God in the face all the time as we study his word, but yet we reject him. We don't do what he says. We hear his voice, but we don't follow him. He's the good shepherd. He's noble. He's beautiful. And we follow him for a host of reasons. And we're going to see him work and show his great compassion as a shepherd yet again. Hopefully next week when we turn in to chapter 11.